Ciao studenti e benvenuti. Welcome to another lesson for beginner Italian. Today we're talking about formal and informal. This is a very difficult concept. So today will be an essential lesson for you going to Italy because you gotta know when to address people formally and when to address them casually. And there are implications, and so hopefully I can help you with that by the end of this kind of short lesson. What is formality? Formality just simply means addressing people respectfully. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be polite if you don't use it. There is a place to be formal and a place to be casual. And so when do you be formal? There are no real strict rules, but the idea is that in most cases you'll be formal. Why? Because I'm assuming that you're over 15, so, if you're considered an adult, so you're not a child anymore, 13, 14, 15, depends, especially the way you look. But you are kind of supposed to address people formally if you don't know them, or, as you will see, if they are above you socially. So this means that every time you address strangers, you are going to be formal. When you address older people, you're going to be formal. And when you address somebody who's in a higher social status in that moment, that's important. We're not talking about crazy ceremonies that you should perform for somebody who's in a higher social status than you. It's just the language that you use and the subject that you use to address them. And when you are in formal settings would be, for example, in Italy, being a college, university, that's a formal setting, so you're going to be formal. If you went to a conference, probably you'd be formal and, things like that. Now, if you are of any age, but you find yourself in these other scenarios, then you're going to be casual. You'll address people informally. This is when you're talking to family, to friends, to children, to pets. You're going to be informal. Big question.
Do I have to, Manu? Do I have to learn how to be formal?
Yes, you really do. You really do, because Italians will expect formality coming out of any adult that interacts with them, unless, and I will explain unless soon, but there are times where you don't have to, but in most cases I recommend that you do. So what happens if you don't? Italians will be forgiving if your Italian is really basic. So if you start speaking and they can tell that you are a beginner, which you are today, is fine. But as you progress, you may become really good. I hope so. But yeah, if you're a beginner and they can tell that you are kind of struggling with your words, then it doesn't matter if you do use it or not. But the moment you are good enough to speak and to hold a conversation, it's expected that you are formal to them, unless you have established a connection and a friendship, or unless you are both young. So you're both of the same age-ish, and you're both on the younger side. It doesn't mean you have to be a teenager. We will cover a few scenarios, but just to give you an idea, if I went to a party where my friends are having a party, and I'm 47, my friends are, anything between 35 and 50, whatever. And I walk in and it's a very casual party and somebody introduces me to their friend, and I can tell that they're kind of the same age. They're not like 10, 20 years older. And they are also dressed casually like me, and we are at a party with friends. Then it could be okay to not be formal, because I assume that those people are cool with me being casual. But you gotta be careful with the scenarios. I'm going to cover a few scenarios just to give you an idea of what your choices should be. So what factors determine whether you should be formal and informal? Let's have a look. So as I said earlier, these are the main ones. Age. Your age, the other person's age. The social status, meaning I'm a patient, they're a doctor. And context. So I could be a patient and I could be a doctor, but if we meet at a party, you're not my doctor, right? So context will also determine that. Now, when it comes to things like social status, it will win over age sometimes. So I could be 60 and I could be going to a doctor who's 25. Probably you're not going to find a 25-year-old doctor in Italy, but let's say 25. Then they are above you in that context. And so you will have to address them formally, and they will address you formally as well because you're much older. And so basically the conversation will be formal on all fronts. It could be different if you're 25 and you go to a doctor who's also 25. Now, your first approach would be to be formal because they're above you, but then the doctor, and I'll tell you how to do this, can tell you to not worry with formality because we're the same age. So there's so many nuances here. And who decides? Well, I think I've just told you. The person who's above in that scenario decides whether it's okay to not be formal. So it's best if you think of it this way. I'm going to go in formal, and then depending on who's above in that scenario, we can decide to not be formal. So a 20-year-old person cannot decide to be casual if they're dealing with somebody who's 60. They should, in all circumstances, be formal. Even if that person is the grandparent of their friend, they should address that person formally until that person, 60, 70, 80, makes it clear that they don't want to be treated formally. We're cool. I'm cool. I'm a cool person. And being formal doesn't mean you're not cool, but So let's have a look at how do you speak formally, because that's the main thing. What changes is how you speak. It's not how you behave. You speak formally. So we are going to use the third person of a verb and a bunch of titles. So what's the third person again? The first person is io, the second person is tu, the third person is lei or lui, so he or she. We're going to use the pronoun that I'll tell you in a second, lei, and the verb that we use, and we're learning verbs next lesson. So you're going to conjugate the verb as if you were conjugating the verb for he or she. So instead of saying, do you know where the bank is? You're going to say, does the sir know where the bank is? Does the ma'am know where the bank is? But you're talking to the person. That's what makes it a little bit weird for English speakers, because it's extremely formal and it doesn't quite make sense, to an English speaker to do that. So if I wanted to say, do you like wine? In English, it's casual, like, do you, my friend, like wine? Now, if you want it to be formal in English, you can still find ways to do it. You would just maybe add a word like sir. Do you like wine, sir? And then you become basically formal, right? Now, in Italian, the way we become formal, instead of saying, do you like wine? We are going to literally saying, does she like wine? Does she like this wine? Sir or ma'am? I know it's bad English, but what I'm trying to show you is we are conjugating the verb for the word lei, which technically means she, and then we use it to address anybody formally, even if it's a man. So I'll show you what that sounds in Italian, because in English it just makes no sense, right? So like I said, the formal pronoun that we use for you sir, you ma'am, is lei. You've seen this word before, it means she, but now I'm telling you that it also means you sir, you ma'am. It actually is spelled in a little different way if you are reading or writing. When we say lei meaning she, we don't capitalize the first letter unless it's the beginning of a sentence, but lei is spelled L-E-I, and that means she, okay? When lei means you sir, you ma'am, we spell it with a capital L. That is the only difference. If you're reading, you can tell that lei means you sir, you ma'am. Otherwise, if you hear it, it sounds the same. Now, it also says you doctor, because if I address somebody as lei, and I actually say the word lei, I'm treating them formally already, so that could be a doctor. So that lei means you doctor. So that sentence, do you like this wine, becomes basically, does the sir like this wine? So you have to get used in your brain to address the person in front of you as if you were talking about them. Get it? So you talk to the person, but you talk to them as if you were being very indirect. That's what's happening. An equivalent of this distinction would be like saying, yo man, you like this? As opposed to, good afternoon, sir. Do you like this? So it's that kind of thing. There will be many times when you actually have the power to decide. Why? Well, because in many cases, you'll be in the position of power, meaning you're the customer. If you're in Italy holidaying, then you are the customer at the hotel, like in many other places. And so it will be possibly possible for you to decide to set the tone for formality, because the other person will see you as a higher status. So even though they might be same age, they might be not children, not teenagers, but grown-ups and maybe a little bit older than you. If you're in that position, you could kind of set the tone and suggest that you be casual. So how do you do that? We have a couple of expressions that we can use to invite the other person to drop the formality and just talk to us casually. Be careful with this. It's very powerful, and like any power, you gotta know when to use it, right? You don't want to use it at the wrong time. So you don't go to your doctor and say this, diamoci del tu. Diamoci del tu. Diamoci del tu. This means literally means let's give each other tu. Meaning let's address each other as tu and not lei. Diamoci del tu. I think there's another one. You could say dammi del tu. Dammi del tu means address me with tu. Now, again, be careful because you can totally say to somebody who clearly looks younger than you, then you can set the tone and say, dammi del tu, or diamoci del tu. But if you are in doubt, maybe wait for them to be brave enough to suggest it. Another way that you could get to be informal is just saying, chiamami, call me, and your name. You know, chiamami Manu, chiamami Francis, chiamami Joe. That means just call me by my name, basically, which kind of means let's be informal. So here's a few tips. Like I said, you should start formally in most cases, unless you're a teenager. You can ask to switch to informal only when you have the power, and I've explained when that is the case. And you should use titles. Now, what's titles? Well, you can address people as signore, signora, dottore, professore, depending on their title. Now, if you don't know it, you don't know it. But guess what? Italians are a little bit obsessed with their titles. They work so hard to earn the title that they'll tell you if they're a professor. They will tell you if they're a doctor. So here are a few titles that are very common. Signora, ma'am. Now, if you need to address the person as Mrs. or Ms. or any of those variations and that person, what we do is we take the word signora, which means ma'am, and we follow it by usually with the last name. So I think I have an example here. If one of my relatives whose last name is Venditti, she would be Signora Venditti. So you would address her as Signora Venditti. Signora Venditti. I didn't say my mother because in Italy wives don't usually take the husband's name, and so I didn't want to say my mom because she doesn't go by my last name. But Signora Venditti if you're addressing a lady whose last name is that. There's a chance to also use Signora and the first name, Signora Maria, and that is done in a certain scenario where you are very familiar with the person, so there is affection. You've known this person for a long time because maybe you've been going to their shop for 5 years or 2 months, whatever. You're on good terms, but you still want to treat them with respect because they're older than you. So you always treat the elder with respect. And a way to do it is to mix the signora with the first name, if you know their first name. Signora Maria, come sta? Now, for men, we have the word signore, which means sir, signore, or gentleman, sir. When we want to use signore to mean Mr., we drop the final E. So we say signor. So in my case, it would be Signor Venditti. Signor Venditti. So if you were to see me formally, you say, Buongiorno, Signor Venditti. Or if you were on good terms and I was much older, then you could say Signor Manu. But I've never heard that referred to me yet. And we're done for today. Just head over to italyminutes.com to find all of our courses, all of our resources, our social network where you can practice Italian, access our content in Italian, and all of our amazing services, including, I haven't mentioned it so far, but we actually have video calls that you can speak Italian to our team. So go and try.